Evelyn Davis had been a part of the Turner household for nearly 4 decades. At 60, her deep brown skin bore the marks of a life spent in service, but her posture remained upright, her movements deliberate and precise. With every passing year, she had become as much a fixture in the grand mansion as the antique furniture or the pristine chandeliers. She moved silently through the rooms, a presence noticed only by the staff she supervised, and rarely, if ever, by the Turner family. Except, perhaps, for Martha. Evelyn was respected by everyone in the household staff. Her years of wisdom, her ability to anticipate needs before they were voiced, and her quiet authority made her the backbone of the mansion's day-to-day operations. For the younger maids, Evelyn was a mother figure. For the butlers and chefs, a colleague whose word they trusted implicitly. She worked with precision and grace, despite her aging body. Every corner of the Turner mansion had been touched by her care at one point or another. The Turners, however, saw none of this. To them, Evelyn was invisible, except when they needed something. Martha Turner, the 20-something daughter of William Turner, was the worst of them all. Martha's relationship with Evelyn was one of open disdain. She had grown up surrounded by unimaginable wealth, and with it, a sense of entitlement that bordered on cruelty. The stark contrast between Martha's life of luxury and Evelyn's life of service only fueled the young woman's sense of superiority. "I can't stand how slow you're getting, Evelyn," Martha would often say, her tone dripping with condescension. Evelyn, never one to let such words affect her, would simply nod and continue her work, her face revealing none of the hurt or exhaustion she felt. Evelyn had learned long ago that in this world, some people simply wouldn't see her for who she truly was, but that didn't mean she couldn't see herself. Each night, as she removed her apron and prepared to leave the grand estate for her modest home, she held her head high, knowing she gave everything she had to the job. Evelyn found dignity in her work, even if others didn't. Martha Turner, on the other hand, couldn't have been more different from Evelyn. Born into a world where everything was handed to her, Martha had never known hardship or struggle. At 25, she had grown up in the Turner mansion, where nothing was out of reach. The best schools, the finest clothes, vacations to exclusive destinations. These were her norms. With her perfectly styled blonde hair, designer outfits, and flawless skin, Martha embodied privilege in every sense of the word. She often strutted through the mansion with an air of superiority, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floors, barely acknowledging the people who worked tirelessly to maintain her comfortable life. To Martha, the staff were just part of the background, invisible as long as everything ran smoothly. And when things didn't go her way, Evelyn was the first to feel the brunt of her wrath. "Evelyn," Martha's voice echoed through the hallway one morning as she descended the grand staircase, irritation clear in her tone. "Why hasn't my dress been pressed yet? I told you I need it ready by noon." Evelyn, who had been in the kitchen preparing a breakfast tray, paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. "I'm just finishing up with the breakfast, Miss Martha. I'll take care of it right after," she replied in her usual calm tone, not looking up from her work. Martha rolled her eyes, her impatience boiling over. "You've been here forever, Evelyn. You should know better by now," she snapped, before turning on her heel and walking away without waiting for a response. It wasn't just Evelyn who bore the weight of Martha's sharp tongue. The entire staff felt the sting of her entitled attitude, but Martha reserved a particular kind of cruelty for Evelyn. Perhaps it was because Evelyn had been there for as long as Martha could remember, a permanent fixture of her childhood, and Martha had never learned to see her as more than just another part of the household furniture. For Martha, being the daughter of William Turner, a man whose wealth and influence reached across industries, gave her a sense of invincibility. She had been taught, implicitly, that money solved all problems, that status was power, and that people like Evelyn were beneath her. This belief made her blind to the struggles and sacrifices of others. To her, Evelyn wasn't a person with a life, history, or feelings. She was just there to serve. Martha's complete lack of empathy had been fueled by her father's indulgence. William, a busy man, had always showered his daughter with gifts, but rarely with discipline or guidance. And so Martha grew up in a bubble of privilege, where she believed her wealth not only elevated her above the staff, but insulated her from the consequences of her actions. Evelyn had weathered many such moments of disrespect from Martha over the years, but little did either of them know. The tides were about to change in ways Martha couldn't imagine. The Turner mansion was hosting one of its frequent, extravagant gatherings, with influential guests mingling in the lavishly decorated ballroom. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in warm light, while servers weaved through the crowd offering champagne on silver trays. The event, like many others, was a spectacle of wealth and status, where deals were made with a handshake and reputations were built on charm and money. But beneath the glittering surface, the dynamic between the staff and the Turner family remained the same. Silent, invisible service for those who held power. As Evelyn moved discreetly through the ballroom, attending to guests with the same grace she always did, she became the target of Martha's cruelty once again. This time, however, Martha decided to make a show of her disdain. It was as if humiliating Evelyn in private wasn't enough. Martha needed to display her power in front of an audience. "Evelyn, don't just stand there like a statue." Martha's sharp voice cut through the noise of the party, her eyes scanning the room to ensure others were watching. "Fetch me another glass of champagne. And this time, try not to spill it all over the floor like you did last time." The words hung in the air, and several guests turned to look, their curiosity piqued by the confrontation. Evelyn, who had been in the middle of clearing a table, froze for a second. The sting of the insult was immediate, and though her heart ached, she remained composed. She had learned long ago that in situations like this, silence was her shield. Without uttering a word, she quietly placed the tray down and walked toward the kitchen to fulfill Martha's order. Martha, however, wasn't finished. "You know," Martha continued, her voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear, "people like her are lucky to have jobs like this. If it weren't for us, she'd probably be out on the streets." A murmur of awkwardness rippled through the small crowd that had gathered around Martha, but no one spoke up. The guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to respond. Martha's father wasn't present at the moment, and without his oversight, Martha felt emboldened to behave however she pleased. For her, this was just another demonstration of her superiority, something she felt entitled to flaunt. Evelyn returned, carefully balancing a fresh glass of champagne on a silver tray. She placed it in front of Martha with steady hands, her face an unreadable mask of professionalism. But inside, the hurt was deep. She had endured years of disrespect and cruelty, but the public humiliation cut deeper than usual. Martha's words lingered in the air, pressing down on her dignity like a weight she could barely bear. Finally, Martha sneered, taking the glass without so much as a thank you. Then, as if to twist the knife further, she added with a smirk, "You really should think about retirement, Evelyn. I'm sure there are easier jobs for someone your age." Evelyn, still silent, nodded and walked away, her back straight, refusing to let her shoulders sag under the weight of the insult. She had her pride, and no matter how often Martha tried to strip it from her, Evelyn knew she was more than what the young woman believed. She would not let herself be reduced to a mere object of ridicule. As she disappeared into the hallway leading to the servants' quarters, Evelyn allowed herself a brief moment of solitude. She leaned against the wall, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. The laughter from the ballroom faded into the background, replaced by the sound of her own heartbeat. For a moment, she wondered how much longer she could endure this, how many more insults she could take before it became too much. But then, as always, she stood tall once again and returned to her duties, determined to finish the night with the same grace and strength she always had. Little did she know, the events of that evening would soon reach the ears of someone who would not stand idly by. The following morning, the mansion was eerily quiet compared to the bustling festivities of the previous night. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long, warm shadows across the marble floors. In his study, William Turner sat behind a massive oak desk, reviewing business documents. His sharp mind was always focused on deals, investments, and maintaining the empire he had built over the years. He rarely concerned himself with the minutiae of what happened in his home, trusting that the staff would handle everything without his involvement. But that morning, something caught his attention. As he was going through his papers, the head butler, James, entered the room. His face was tight, and there was a hesitation in his posture that immediately told William something was wrong. "Mr. Turner," James began carefully, "I feel it's my duty to bring a matter to your attention. It's about your daughter and Evelyn." William looked up, slightly surprised. He rarely involved himself in the staff's affairs, and even more rarely in the personal dynamics of his household. "What about them?" he asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice, but with the undertone of a man who didn't want to be burdened with trivial matters. James shifted uncomfortably, knowing that what he was about to say could have serious repercussions. "There was an incident last night during the party. Miss Martha, she humiliated Evelyn in front of the guests. She made some inappropriate remarks, sir. It wasn't just a private conversation. It was done in public, and it was quite cruel." William's face hardened, but he said nothing at first, digesting the information. His daughter, Martha, had always been headstrong and, admittedly, spoiled, but he had assumed it was harmless behavior, the kind that came with youth and privilege. After all, he had given her everything she ever wanted. But now, hearing about her public humiliation of Evelyn, a woman who had served his family loyally for decades, something inside him shifted. "What exactly did she say?" William asked, his voice calm, but with an edge that made James choose his next words carefully. "She made some disparaging comments about Evelyn's age and her position, sir. Implied that Evelyn was lucky to even have a job. And there were racial undertones as well," James explained, his eyes not quite meeting William's. William leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for a long moment, processing the weight of what he'd just learned. He respected Evelyn in his own way, though he had rarely taken the time to acknowledge it. She had been a steady presence in his life for as long as he could remember, keeping the household running without fail. And now, the thought of his daughter, his flesh and blood, treating her with such disdain left a bitter taste in his mouth. James continued, "Sir, Evelyn didn't say a word in her defense. She simply carried on with her duties. But the staff, we all saw it. It was painful to witness." William's jaw tightened. He had always believed that wealth came with responsibility, not just to those of equal status, but to everyone around you. The Turners had always prided themselves on treating their employees well, but somewhere along the way, Martha had missed that lesson. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, James," William said, his voice low but resolute. "I'll handle it." James nodded respectfully and left the room, closing the door behind him. For several moments, William remained still, his thoughts racing. His love for Martha was undeniable, but he couldn't ignore the fact that he had failed to teach her the most important lessons about respect and humility. He had indulged her too much, shielded her from the real world, and now she had crossed a line. The image of Evelyn, enduring Martha's cruelty without protest, weighed heavily on his conscience. It was time for a serious conversation with his daughter, one that would change the course of their relationship and, perhaps, Martha's future. Later that afternoon, William found Martha lounging in the sunroom, her favorite space in the mansion. The room was filled with light, casting a soft glow on the pale cream furniture and the elegant vases of fresh flowers that were replaced daily. Martha sat on a chaise, idly scrolling through her phone, entirely oblivious to the storm brewing in her father's mind. "Can we talk?" William's voice cut through the room, deep and controlled, though the tension was unmistakable. He walked in, his towering presence making the normally expansive sunroom feel much smaller. Martha looked up, surprised by the serious tone in her father's voice. He was rarely stern with her, and when he was, it was usually about trivial matters like missing a family dinner or overspending on another designer outfit. "Of course, Daddy," she said, smiling sweetly as she put her phone down, assuming this was just another minor reprimand. She had always been able to charm her way out of any situation with him. William sat down across from her, his hands clasped tightly together, a rare sign of discomfort. He wasn't sure how to begin, how to confront his own daughter about behavior he found not just disappointing, but disgraceful. For all his wealth and influence, this was a conversation he had never prepared for. "I heard about what happened last night," he began, his voice steady but heavy with disapproval. "With Evelyn." Martha's smile faltered slightly, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. What about it? She was being slow, as usual. It's not a big deal, Dad. William's brow furrowed. Not a big deal? You humiliated her in front of our guests, Martha. You made cruel, condescending remarks, comments that had racial undertones. You insulted a woman who has worked for this family for decades, and you think that's not a big deal? Martha shifted in her seat, her irritation growing. Oh, come on. It's Evelyn. She's just a maid. You're acting like I insulted one of your business partners or something. She crossed her arms, her tone flippant, as if the whole thing was being blown out of proportion. William's patience was wearing thin. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a more dangerous level. Just a maid? She's been in this house longer than you've been alive. She's worked harder in a single day than you've likely worked in your entire life. And the way you treated her, like she was beneath you, was not only unacceptable, it was disgusting. Martha rolled her eyes, clearly not taking the situation seriously. Dad, you're being dramatic. It's not like she cares. She barely even reacted. She's used to this sort of thing. The dismissiveness in Martha's voice was like a slap to William's face. He had expected some pushback, but this level of indifference was shocking, even for her. He had always known Martha to be self-centered, but seeing her lack of empathy in such a stark light was almost too much to bear. Martha, you don't understand the gravity of your actions, William said, his voice rising slightly. People like Evelyn, people who work hard, day in and day out, without the luxuries you take for granted, they deserve respect. You're fortunate enough to live a life of privilege, but that doesn't give you the right to look down on others. You have no idea what it's like to work for what you have. At this, Martha's eyes narrowed. She was tired of the lecture, tired of being treated like she was a child who needed correction. You don't get it, Dad. I'm your daughter. This is our world. People like Evelyn, they're supposed to serve us. That's just the way things are. William's heart sank. The depth of her entitlement was staggering. He realized, perhaps too late, that he had played a role in shaping this mindset by allowing her to grow up in a bubble of wealth without ever having to face the realities of the world. I've let you down, William said quietly, more to himself than to her. I've let you believe that money and status are all that matter. But that changes now. I can't allow you to continue treating people this way. Martha raised an eyebrow, not fully grasping what her father was implying. What are you talking about? William stood, his decision made. You're going to learn what it means to work, to earn respect. And you're going to learn it the hard way. This attitude of yours ends today. For the first time, Martha sensed that this wasn't just another scolding. There was something different in her father's tone, something final. Her confident smirk faded, replaced by uncertainty. What does that mean? You'll see, William said, walking out of the room without looking back. He knew the lesson he was about to teach his daughter would be difficult for her to understand, but it was a lesson she desperately needed. Over the next few days, William made a point to watch Evelyn more closely than he had in years. He'd never paid much attention to the daily routines of the staff. His world had always been filled with high-stakes business meetings, negotiations, and social obligations. But now, as he observed Evelyn move quietly through the house, he began to see her with new eyes. Evelyn, despite the years of hard work that had taken a toll on her body, still carried herself with quiet dignity. He watched as she supervised the cleaning staff, her calm authority ensuring that everything ran smoothly. The younger maids often came to her with questions, seeking her guidance, and Evelyn, with her years of experience, provided them with gentle, practical advice. William noticed how the other staff members respected her. They never raised their voices to her or questioned her decisions. In fact, they looked to her as a leader, even if unofficially. There was a sense of reverence in the way they spoke to her, a quiet acknowledgement that she was the heart of the household. And yet, Evelyn never sought attention or recognition. She did her job as she always had, with humility and grace, never complaining, never asking for anything in return. He also noticed how Evelyn handled the aftermath of Martha's cruel behavior at the party. She hadn't mentioned it, not to William or to anyone else. She continued with her duties as if nothing had happened, but William could see the exhaustion in her eyes. It wasn't just physical tiredness. It was the emotional weight of years of being treated as less than human. One afternoon, as William passed through the kitchen, he overheard two of the younger maids talking in hushed voices. "It's not fair, the way Miss Martha treats her," one of them said. "Evelyn's done nothing but take care of this family for years." "I know," the other replied, shaking her head, "but she never says anything. I don't know how she stays so calm." William paused, feeling a wave of guilt wash over him. He had allowed this to happen, allowed Martha to grow up thinking it was acceptable to treat someone like Evelyn with such disdain. He had been so focused on his business and his social status that he had neglected the most important values: respect, empathy, and humanity. That evening, after dinner, William sought Evelyn out. He found her in the laundry room, folding sheets with the same meticulous care she gave to every task. She didn't notice him at first, too absorbed in her work. When she finally looked up, there was a brief flicker of surprise in her eyes. William Turner rarely sought out conversations with the staff. "Mr. Turner," she greeted him respectfully, her voice steady, though her hands continued their work. William cleared his throat, feeling a strange sense of awkwardness that he hadn't expected. "Evelyn, I wanted to talk to you about what happened the other night with Martha." Evelyn's hands stilled for a moment, but she quickly resumed folding the sheets, her expression unreadable. "It's not necessary, sir. Miss Martha is young. She doesn't know better yet." William frowned. "That doesn't excuse what she did. You've worked for this family for longer than I can remember, and you deserve better. What she said to you, what she did, it was wrong." Evelyn gave him a small, tired smile. "Thank you, Mr. Turner, but I've learned over the years that some things you just have to let go. This job has given me a lot, and I'm grateful for that." William shook his head. "You shouldn't have to let go of your dignity, Evelyn. You deserve respect. And I'm sorry that I didn't see this sooner." For a moment, there was silence between them. Evelyn didn't know what to say. She had never expected an apology from William. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from a man who had always seemed so distant, so removed from the lives of the people who worked for him. "I'm going to make sure things change around here," William said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Martha needs to learn a lesson about respect and about work." Evelyn didn't ask what he meant by that, but there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. She simply nodded and returned to her work, though William could see that his words had made an impact. As he left the laundry room, William felt more certain than ever that the plan forming in his mind was the right one. Martha needed to understand the value of hard work and the importance of treating people with dignity. And the only way she would learn that was by experiencing it firsthand. The idea began to take shape in William's mind as he lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of his opulent bedroom. For too long, Martha had been sheltered from the realities of life outside her privileged bubble. She had never known what it meant to struggle, to work for what she had. Her entitlement was a direct result of the life he had provided for her, and now it was up to him to correct that mistake. But words wouldn't be enough. He had seen how easily Martha brushed off his reprimands earlier, how little she respected the gravity of her actions. No, if Martha were to truly understand what she had done, to learn the lesson she so desperately needed, she would have to experience the life of those she looked down upon. The next morning, William called Martha into his study, his demeanor calm but resolute. Martha entered with a casual air, her hair perfectly styled, dressed in designer clothes. She was clearly unconcerned, expecting this to be another brief lecture from her father that would end with her continuing her life as usual. "Dad, what's this about?" she asked, sitting down in one of the leather chairs opposite his desk. "I've got plans today, so if this is another talk about Evelyn, can we make it quick?" William's face remained serious as he leaned forward, clasping his hands together on the desk. "This won't be quick, Martha, and it's not just about Evelyn. It's about you and the way you've been behaving." Martha sighed, rolling her eyes. "I already told you, Dad. It's not that big of a deal. You're making this way more dramatic than it needs to be." William's expression didn't change. "You don't understand the damage you've done, not just to Evelyn, but to yourself. You've grown up in this house, surrounded by luxury and privilege, and it's made you forget what really matters. You treat people like they're beneath you because you've never had to live their reality." Martha frowned, clearly growing impatient. "I'm your daughter. You've always said I deserve the best. Why is that suddenly a bad thing?" William took a deep breath. "You do deserve the best, Martha. But deserving the best doesn't mean treating others as if they deserve less. And that's something you need to learn." There was a long pause, the tension in the room growing thick. Martha shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her eyes narrowing. "So what's your point? What's this really about?" William stood up, pacing behind his desk for a moment before turning to face her. "You're going to learn what it means to work hard, to earn respect. You're going to do Evelyn's job." Martha blinked, confusion flashing across her face. What? What are you talking about?" "For the next few months, you're going to take on the duties that Evelyn performs in this household," William explained, his voice firm. "You're going to clean, cook, and serve, just like she does. You'll wake up early, you'll follow her routine, and you'll learn what it means to work for what you have." Martha stared at him, incredulous. "You're joking, right? This is some kind of punishment?" "I'm completely serious," William said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You think you're above everyone else in this house, but you don't know the first thing about what it takes to keep this place running. It's time for you to learn." Martha stood up abruptly, her face flushing with anger. "This is ridiculous. You can't make me do this. I'm not a servant. I'm your daughter." William's gaze remained steady. "And as my daughter, you're going to learn what I should have taught you years ago. This isn't just a punishment, Martha. It's a lesson. You need to understand what real work is, and you need to understand what respect looks like from the other side." Martha's jaw tightened, her hands clenched at her sides. "You can't do this. This is insane." "I've already spoken to the staff," William said, ignoring her outburst. "They know what's expected of you. You'll start tomorrow. And let me be clear. If you refuse to do this, there will be consequences." Martha's eyes widened in disbelief. "Consequences? Like what? You're going to cut me off?" William didn't flinch. "If I have to. This isn't negotiable, Martha. Either you do this, or you'll find out what it's like to live without the privileges you take for granted." For a moment, Martha was speechless. She had never seen her father this determined, this unyielding. She had always been able to bend him to her will, to convince him that she was right. But now, standing in front of him, she realized that this time was different. He wasn't going to back down. "You're serious," she said quietly, her voice a mixture of shock and frustration. "As serious as I've ever been," William replied. "This is for your own good, Martha. I hope one day you'll understand that." Martha turned away, storming out of the room without another word. William watched her go, a heavy weight settling in his chest. He knew this wouldn't be easy, and that Martha would fight him every step of the way. But he also knew that this was the only way to teach her the lesson she so desperately needed to learn. The next morning, Martha awoke in a haze of frustration and disbelief. She couldn't believe her father had gone through with his threat. The entire night, she had tossed and turned, hoping this was some bizarre test of his patience or a temporary punishment he would soon retract. But as the sun streamed through her bedroom windows, reality settled in. She could no longer ignore the inevitable. Her father had made it clear. She was to spend the next few months working like one of the household staff. When she finally dragged herself out of bed, it was hours later than when Evelyn and the rest of the staff had already begun their duties. Martha descended the grand staircase in a silk robe, hoping that maybe, just maybe, her father had forgotten about the punishment. But there, standing in the kitchen waiting for her, was Evelyn. Evelyn's face was as calm as always, but there was a faint look of expectation in her eyes, as if she was curious about how this spoiled young woman would handle what was coming. "You're late," Evelyn said quietly, her voice holding no malice, just a simple statement of fact. Martha glared at her, still clinging to her pride. "I don't see how that's relevant. I'm not a maid." Evelyn didn't flinch at the venom in Martha's voice. She had seen much worse. "You are now, Miss Martha, at least for the next few months. And that means you follow the schedule. We start early here." Martha's eyes flashed with indignation, but she said nothing. She still held onto the hope that her father would swoop in and end this ridiculous charade. But there was no sign of him. Only Evelyn, standing calmly, waiting for her to comply. Reluctantly, Martha stepped forward. "Fine. What do I have to do?" Evelyn handed her a pair of gloves and a cleaning rack. "Today, you'll be cleaning the floors. Start in the dining room, and make sure it's spotless before you move on to the next room." Martha stared at the gloves and rag in disbelief. "You can't be serious. I'm not going to get down on my hands and knees and scrub floors like some peasant." Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. "That's exactly what you'll do. It's the same thing I do every day. Now, if you want to get through this, I suggest you start. The dining room is large, and it will take time." With a huff of frustration, Martha snatched the gloves and rag from Evelyn's hands. She stormed into the dining room, her heels clicking loudly on the polished floors. The dining room, with its long mahogany table and rows of chairs, suddenly felt like a prison to her. The room, once a symbol of her family's wealth and power, now seemed like a battlefield she was being forced to endure. She knelt down on the cold, hard floor, her hands shaking with anger. The absurdity of the situation felt overwhelming. She was Martha Turner, daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the state, and here she was, scrubbing floors like a servant. As she began to wipe the floor, her movements were jerky and resentful. The cleaning felt beneath her, demeaning in every way. She was used to giving orders, not following them, and the physical labor was something entirely foreign to her. Within minutes, her back ached, and her hands were sore from gripping the rag. But there was no one to help her, no one to take over the task she had been given. Hours passed, and with each passing moment, Martha's anger grew. By the time she had finished the dining room, her pristine clothes were stained, her knees were sore, and her pride was thoroughly battered. She stood up, tossing the rag aside in disgust. Evelyn reappeared in the doorway, silently inspecting Martha's work. She walked around the dining room, running her fingers along the baseboards, her sharp eyes catching every detail. "It's passable," Evelyn said finally, though her voice gave no praise. "But there's still dust in the corners. Next time, you'll need to be more thorough." Martha clenched her fists. "Next time? You've got to be joking." "This was humiliating enough." "This is only the beginning," Evelyn replied, her voice as steady as ever. "Tomorrow, you'll start earlier. And there's more to do than just cleaning. You'll help prepare meals, serve the family, and maintain the house. Just like I do." Martha's heart sank. She had thought that maybe, just maybe, this punishment would be a one-day ordeal, something to prove a point before her father let her return to her life of luxury. But now, she realized this was going to be much longer and far more difficult than she had anticipated. She wanted to scream, to throw a tantrum and demand her life back. But deep down, she knew her father wouldn't listen. He was determined to make her learn this lesson, no matter how hard she fought against it. And so, as Martha trudged back to her room that evening, her body aching from the unfamiliar labor, she felt a sinking realization settle over her. She wasn't going to get out of this easily. For the first time in her life, she was going to have to work. Weeks passed, and the transformation in the Turner household became more evident with each passing day. Martha, who had once floated through life without a care, was now waking up at dawn, scrubbing floors, preparing meals, and learning the painstaking details of maintaining a grand home. Her manicured hands had grown rough, her fashionable clothes replaced with practical, plain garments. But more than the physical toll, it was the emotional impact that had begun to weigh on her. She could no longer ignore the labor that had once seemed invisible to her. Each day spent in Evelyn's shoes chipped away at the arrogance and entitlement that had once defined her. Meanwhile, William Turner observed his daughter's progress with quiet satisfaction. He saw the exhaustion in her face, the frustration in her eyes, but he also saw something else, understanding. The hard work was slowly forcing Martha to confront the reality of what it meant to serve, to work tirelessly without recognition. But the lesson wasn't complete yet. William knew there was still one more thing he needed to do. One afternoon, William gathered the household staff in the grand hall of the mansion. It was rare for him to address the staff directly, But today was different. He had planned something special. Evelyn, in particular, was requested to be present, though she had no idea why. She stood at the back of the room, her posture as straight as ever, though her eyes were filled with curiosity. As the staff assembled, William stood at the front, his gaze scanning the familiar faces. He cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Thank you all for gathering here today. I've called this meeting because there's something that needs to be addressed, something long overdue." Martha, standing off to the side, was watching with uncertainty. She had no idea what her father had planned, but after weeks of punishment, she had learned to expect the unexpected. William continued, "For decades, this household has run smoothly because of the hard work and dedication of one person. Someone who has given her life to this family, who has worked tirelessly behind the scenes, often without the recognition she deserves. And that person is Evelyn Davis." The room was silent for a moment, and then all eyes turned to Evelyn, who stood motionless, her expression one of quiet shock. She had never asked for recognition, never expected praise. Her role in the Turner household had always been one of service, and she had accepted that long ago. But hearing William's words, hearing her name spoken with such respect, it took her by surprise. William smiled softly at Evelyn. "Evelyn, you've been with us for most of my life. You've taken care of this house, raised my daughter, and managed this staff with a level of grace and dignity that few could match. And it's time that we acknowledge your contributions publicly." He motioned to a large plaque that had been set up on a small pedestal nearby. The plaque was engraved with Evelyn's name and the words, "In honor of a lifetime of service and dedication." Beneath her name was the date she had started working for the Turner family, nearly 4 decades earlier. William stepped forward and, with a nod to one of the staff, unveiled the plaque. "From this day forward, this will hang in the main hallway as a reminder of your years of service, Evelyn. It's a small gesture compared to everything you've given us, but it's a symbol of our gratitude." For the first time in as long as anyone could remember, Evelyn's usually composed expression faltered. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and she struggled to find her voice. She had spent her entire life working without expecting anything in return, and now, standing in front of her colleagues and employers, she was being honored in a way she had never imagined. "Mr. Turner, I don't know what to say," Evelyn murmured, her voice thick with emotion. I've always done what needed to be done." William stepped forward, his expression softening. "You've done more than that, Evelyn. You've been the heart of this household, and I'm sorry it's taken this long for us to recognize it." The other staff members began to applaud, and soon the sound filled the grand hall. Even Martha, standing in the corner, couldn't help but join in, though her emotions were far more conflicted. She had spent weeks doing the very work Evelyn had done for years, and in that time, her perspective had shifted. She no longer saw Evelyn as just another servant, but as a woman who had dedicated her life to this family. And now, watching Evelyn being honored, Martha felt a pang of guilt twist in her chest. Evelyn, overwhelmed by the recognition, wiped her eyes discreetly and smiled. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice steady once more. "It's been an honor to serve this family." The applause continued for several moments, and as it began to die down, William turned to the staff once more. "This recognition isn't just for Evelyn," he said. "It's a reminder to all of us that the work you do here matters. You're not invisible. You're part of what makes this house a home, and I want you all to know that you're valued." The staff, many of whom had worked alongside Evelyn for years, nodded in appreciation. It was rare for someone in William Turner's position to speak so openly about the importance of the people who kept his household running, and it left a lasting impression. As the meeting came to an end and the staff began to disperse, Martha approached Evelyn slowly. She hadn't spoken to Evelyn much since her punishment had begun, and now, standing in front of the woman she had once looked down upon, she wasn't sure where to start. "Evelyn," Martha began, her voice quieter than usual. I didn't realize how much you've done for this family. I never really understood until now." Evelyn looked at Martha with the same calm, steady gaze she always had. "It's never too late to learn, Miss Martha." Martha hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry for everything." Evelyn gave her a small, understanding smile. "Thank you." And with that simple exchange, something shifted between them. Martha still had much to learn, but for the first time in her life, she was starting to understand the value of humility and respect. Evelyn, now honored and respected in the way she always should have been, continued her work with the same quiet grace that had always defined her. The months of hard work had worn on Martha, but in ways that went beyond the physical. Scrubbing floors, serving meals, and managing the endless demands of household chores had broken down the arrogance that had once defined her. It wasn't just the labor itself. It was the realization of how much she had taken for granted. The Turner mansion, once a symbol of her untouchable status, had become something entirely different in her eyes. She no longer looked at the polished floors, the perfectly arranged table settings, or the spotless windows with indifference. Instead, she saw the hands that kept everything in order, the people she had once dismissed as invisible. Most of all, she saw Evelyn. Martha had grown up seeing Evelyn as just another part of the house, someone whose purpose was to serve. But now, after spending months doing Evelyn's work, Martha understood how wrong she had been. Each day, as she labored alongside the household staff, she realized the depth of Evelyn's patience, her resilience, and most importantly, her dignity. And with each realization, Martha's shame grew. It had taken weeks for Martha to finally confront Evelyn, but when she did, it was not out of obligation. It was out of genuine remorse. One evening, as the rest of the staff began to settle in for the night, Martha found Evelyn in the kitchen, quietly washing the last of the day's dishes. "Evelyn," Martha began, her voice tentative, as if she wasn't entirely sure how to start the conversation. Evelyn turned to face her, her expression calm as always, though there was a hint of curiosity in her eyes. "Yes, Miss Martha?" Martha took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. The way I treated you, the way I treated everyone. And I wanted to apologize." Evelyn regarded her silently for a moment, as if weighing her words before she responded. "What you did was hurtful, Miss Martha, but I've seen people change. Is that what's happening with you?" Martha nodded, her throat tight with the weight of her emotions. "I didn't understand before. I didn't understand how much work goes into keeping this place running, how hard you've worked all these years. I didn't understand the dignity in it." Evelyn smiled gently, wiping her hands on a towel before sitting down at the kitchen table. "Dignity isn't about what kind of work you do, Martha. It's about how you do it. We all have different roles in this world, but no one's role makes them better than anyone else. I think you're starting to see that now." Martha sat down across from her, feeling the weight of Evelyn's words. "I wish I could take back all the things I said, all the ways I hurt you." Evelyn's eyes softened. "You can't change the past, but you can change who you are moving forward. That's what matters." Martha looked down at her hands, the same hands that had once only held designer bags and champagne glasses, now rough from scrubbing and cleaning. "I'm not the same person I was before. I don't want to be." "I believe you," Evelyn said, her voice kind but firm. "And it's not just about how you treat me. It's about how you treat everyone. The world isn't divided into people who serve and people who are served. We're all human, and we all deserve respect." Martha nodded, her eyes welling up with tears she had been holding back for weeks. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. Truly." Evelyn reached across the table, placing a hand over Martha's. "I know you are, and I forgive you." The simplicity of those words, "I forgive you," hit Martha harder than any punishment ever could. For months, she had carried the guilt of her actions, but Evelyn's forgiveness was the first step in Martha's own healing. It was a forgiveness that Martha didn't feel she deserved, but it was freely given, and that made it all the more powerful. From that day forward, Martha approached her responsibilities with a new sense of humility. The punishment that had once felt unbearable now became a chance for her to grow, to learn. She worked alongside the staff not as someone fulfilling a punishment, but as someone who had come to understand the value of hard work and the importance of respect. As time passed, the icy distance that had once existed between Martha and the household staff began to melt. She no longer saw them as just employees. They were people with lives, with stories, with worth. And in return, The staff began to see Martha in a new light as well. She wasn't the spoiled heiress anymore. She was a young woman trying to find her way, trying to correct her mistakes. One day, as Martha was setting the table for dinner, her father entered the dining room. William had been quietly observing his daughter's transformation over the past few months, and he couldn't have been more proud of the changes he saw in her. "Martha," he said softly, approaching her with a warm smile, "you've come a long way." Martha looked up, meeting her father's eyes. "I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me." William nodded, his expression filled with pride and relief. "It wasn't easy for you, I know. But sometimes the hardest lessons are the most important." Martha took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the journey she had been on. "I'm grateful for it now. I've learned so much, about myself, about others." William placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice soft. "I'm proud of you, Martha. You've grown in ways I didn't think were possible. And I know that Evelyn sees it too." Martha smiled faintly, her heart swelling with emotion. "I just hope I can keep earning the respect I've been given." "You will," William said confidently. "You've already started." In the weeks that followed, Martha's transformation continued to deepen. The punishment her father had once imposed had become a turning point in her life, a catalyst for her to become a better person. She learned to appreciate the work that went into every detail of her life, and more importantly, she learned to see the people around her as equals, deserving of the same respect and dignity that she herself had always expected. And as for Evelyn, her relationship with Martha grew into something neither of them had ever imagined. A relationship built on mutual respect and, slowly, even friendship. Evelyn had always been the silent strength behind the Turner household, but now, she was also a source of wisdom for Martha, guiding her through the complexities of life with the same quiet grace she had always shown. In the end, the Turner mansion remained the same grand, elegant place it had always been. But within its walls, something had shifted. The people who lived and worked there were no longer divided by invisible lines of status. Instead, they were connected by something far more meaningful: understanding, respect, and the shared experience of hard work. Martha Turner had finally learned the lesson her father had set out to teach her. And in doing so, she had not only earned the respect of those around her, she had earned her own. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and watch this next story. It's incredibly moving.